Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sidelined, the podcast to get your fix while sports are in limbo. Here are your hosts, Abby Labar, Carlin Baith, and yours truly, John Root.
Welcome back to Sideline, guys. Another episode, another week. We're so thankful for all of you, and we hope you guys are staying safe out there. It's a crazy world, that's for sure. But, this is really helping all of us get through everything that's going on. We continue to stay positive and interact on here, and we hope that you guys are getting that from us as well. So thanks again. And our next guest this week is somebody who sits in a chair that we haven't interviewed yet. He's a play-by-play broadcaster, which is a very important role on every single broadcast. So it was really exciting to hear from him and all the advice that he has for the position that he's in. So Carlin, you know him very well.
I do. I've gotten to work with him for the past 2 seasons that I've been there. And man, I'll tell you, he's got this old soul and he'll explain it to himself. I'm not just throwing him under the bus. He talks like a wise person who's been in this business for many years, and you won't believe how young he is and all of the experience that he's had. And he's just such a true professional, and I'm so thankful that he took some time to sit down with us and kind of digest everything that he's been through so far in his career.
Yeah, he's so well-spoken and has a lot of really great advice. I know stuff that I'm going to be able to use in my career, and hopefully a lot of people listening and watching are going to be able to use as well. So enough of us talking. Let's dive right on in.
We have a very special guest today. I'm going to go in order of how many different jobs this guy has. We've got a little bit of college basketball, a little bit of college football, a little bit of tennis channel, a little bit of NHL on NBC, but mainly LA Kings play-by-play broadcaster Alex Faust. Alex, thank you for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm doing okay. I think we're all taking it like Vin Scully would want us to, one day at a time.
Oh, well said, Alex. Well, I want to start off here with a kind of a big question, but after college, Northeastern Huskies, by the way, you're a big, proud Husky repper through and through. There we go.
Oh, there it is.
I love it. After college, you did not just hop into this sports career. You were a business analyst at a firm for a while, and then kind of found your way into what you're doing now. But for somebody who's kind of looking at, okay, I'm doing this job now, but I have this goal of doing this other job in sports. I mean, how did you kind of round it out and get to where you are?
Well, I think I made the mistake in college a little bit of giving up on myself and giving up on my chances of being in broadcasting as a career. And I just decided, you know what, I'm not going to do that job, and I'm going to go and do something else. And my senior year, I said, I kind of want to stay involved. And by then it was a little bit too late. But I had the opportunity before starting that job. I actually applied for and got a gig to work the summer doing home games at $40 a pop to do the Staten Island Yankees. So I had a chance to do kind of a minor league baseball season, even though I wasn't traveling. I didn't have any other responsibilities, just show up, do the game, go home. So I had a chance to do a little bit of that. It's funny because I give advice to aspiring broadcasters all the time to be well-rounded and to have something to fall back on in case this line of work doesn't work out, because for a lot of people it doesn't. And the dirty little secret when I started, and I'm sure you're going to ask about where I've worked, but when I was doing freelance basketball for NESN and ESPNU, the dirty little secret is that a lot of people doing play-by-play at that level have other jobs. Really? And you don't hear as much about it because you just you watch TV and you just assume, oh, that's what they do. But a lot of people have other jobs. Maybe they work in real estate, or maybe they're like Kyle Peterson is a real estate agent.
Wow.
In Omaha. Like you don't think about that, but Kyle Peterson has another job. So, I think that's where I tell kids all the time, don't just jump into this thinking that it's going to be, the be all end all. You got to piece stuff together if you want to make it work in this industry.
Abby, I feel like you can relate to that because you hold down 40 hours a week on top of working.
Yes. So I've actually always had a full-time salary job since I graduated, where it's 40 hours a week, my day job. And I've done that. And, thank goodness it's a company that's because they have to be willing, to support you as well
Exactly.
when it comes to, look, I am going to have to go do this Canes game, or I have to go travel. I have to
Mm-hmm.
leave, the office Thursday early to travel for a football game, Friday, Saturday. And, thank goodness they're so supportive of that. I wouldn't be here without them, but it's tough to kind of find those things, but it happens so much more often than you think it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say at Price Waterhouse, it was the same thing. Like I told them, hey, this is my passion. This is my passion project on the side on nights and weekends, and they had to be okay with that. So they had to be okay with me being in Philadelphia on a Wednesday night to do a Temple basketball game, and like, you know what? Not a lot of companies might not be okay with that. So I give a lot of credit to them for supporting me early on in my career and letting me have this passion project that's turned into a full-time career.
That's a tough thing
So
too. When I moved up to San Jose, I had a full-time job as well as working for a couple of teams there in San Jose, and they just weren't really that supportive of it. Even bringing up like, hey, I want to make sure I hit all these hours, make sure I hit all the numbers I want to hit. I want to respect you guys because you're giving me the full-time job. I'm going to come in a few hours early in the morning, and then I'm going to leave a few hours earlier than I usually do. And it still was that disconnect. So it's great to hear places like that really helped get you to where you are now. Because if they didn't give you those
Right.
opportunities, like, who knows?
You've got to have an employer that recognizes that if you are a productive employee, you probably have, passions on the side other than your job. So if you're able to have that as an outlet, then you're going to be more productive. You're going to be more willing to play ball when asked. Let's say in the summer when I wasn't doing a lot of TV, any TV work for that matter, can you go above and beyond to do this? And I'd be happy to raise my hand and say, yeah, because you went to bat for me before. So it's a two-way street. And if you're able to make it work, I think it's probably the best way to get into this business because you're not worried. I had so many friends back in Boston who were piecing together, Division II game here, Division III game here, doing some freelance PR on the side, and they were always worried about where's my next gig going to come from. And when you have the luxury, and it really is a luxury, to be able to set your own schedule with regard to how much sports work am I taking on. You want to climb the ladder, you want to do more and more, but I didn't have to say, well, you know what, I really want to do this Worcester Polytechnic Division III basketball game. I didn't have to do that. I could just say, you know what, I'm going to do my handful of AHL games and handful of the basketball games, and that's it. I don't need any more because I've got this other job that's paying my rent.
Peeling back the curtain too on maybe what your schedule did look like back when you had that full-time job. What did your real life look like in contrast to that? Did you have time for birthday parties and holidays? Because sports, there's a lot of sacrifice. So when you're pulling double duty like that, I mean, what does your life look like too?
In the winter in college sports season, there is no social life.
Oh.
We make a conscious decision. I say all the time, this is the life we choose.
Mhm.
We choose to work on Thanksgiving. We choose to work on Christmas. We choose to work on other holidays that people have. We choose to work Friday and Saturday nights and sacrifice those times that others would have to socialize.
Mhm.
This is, you don't work in this business unless you have a certain sense that, well, you know what? I'm making this sacrifice because I love what I do so much that I don't need that other stuff, or that I'm willing to put it aside because this drives me so much that I'm willing to make that sacrifice. And you know what? With sports on pause and the calendar pushed back, me and my wife Carolyn, we've talked about, because we both work in television, we've talked about the idea that, okay, we're spending a lot of time together now, and we're banking that time. And when we are asked to work in the fall or when things resume, because we're both going to be busy, we cannot say no anymore. So we might not see each other for 2 months. That's just the sacrifice that we know we have to make in advance, because that's the way the business is going to work. It's going to be a survival of the fittest in many ways, of who can who can take on the most jobs, who can take on the most work when things resume.
Yeah, I think the driving force behind all of that, and the key word there is passion for sure. And you make a good point about having this time now with loved ones is the silver lining. But when we are so passionate and so driven to just want to get back to doing what we love, what is your mindset right now, like, besides just kind of spending time with your wife? Like, how are you not going crazy? I know we're all trying to figure out how to keep ourselves sane. What kind of things are you doing to keep yourself busy and of course stay sharp as well? Like, when you're doing play by play, you have games all the time, so you don't
Right.
have to worry about not staying sharp.
The weird thing, when I was starting, I only did about 30 games a year, 30, 35 games a year for ESPNU and Fox my first couple years. So I would have from March until September without games. And like, even then, how do you stay sharp when you don't have much going on? And what I've tried to do, is just every now and again, every couple of days, I will go back and just either put a game on in the background, or just watch a game start to finish, just something I haven't watched in a while.
Mm.
And just, okay, how was I executing play by play at this point in time? How did I handle that situation? How did my style change, evolve over the course of the year? And then I've got a couple other things I'm organizing to, once we get a little bit closer to clarity on when we're playing again, to refresh my notes. So I'll go team by team, player by player, and just look at what I've got, see if I can dig deeper, see if I can, clean it up a little bit, just to get organized in that way. So every single, file on my computer I have for a specific game. Well, can I merge them all and have one space where I've got notes on every single player that I may have taken individually per game over the course of the year, and consolidate that to where next year, when we know we're going to have a condensed schedule, we know it's going to be a little bit more hectic, it'll be easier for me to have that recall. So it's coming up with projects like that. Like, I haven't touched any of my tennis notes this year. They're not playing. So that'll make it even easier for when I need to do, let's say a refresh on the top 50 players. Well, let me do that now while we have some downtime. That way, when things pick up again, I've got it ready to go. So I think, you have to be a little bit industrious in that way of, okay, how can I improve my process even though we're grounded in a way? And it's finding little bits to do like that.
Are you able to relax a little bit during this time though? Because we've talked to a few
Yeah.
people like on the podcast, and it's tough with some of us. There's like big like content creators as well as being hosts or reporters or play-by-play broadcasters, and they're like, I got all these ideas and I want to throw this out on Instagram, or I want to put this YouTube video together. Like, are you able to relax during this time and just try to make the most of hanging with your wife and
Yeah.
really
I,
knowing that sports is just on pause? I got to kind of be on pause a little bit.
I think the last 2 weeks has probably been the closest I've been to it. You know what? It's weird because my schedule usually is at the end of the hockey season in April, I transition into tennis for about a month and a half. And so mid to late May was going to be a natural break anyway. So after the season, pause where it was, everybody's scrambling, like, what do we do? How do we keep fans engaged? What do we do? So, everybody's trying to put out as much as possible. And then April arrives and you're like, okay, can we extend this? Can we squeeze the lemon a little bit more? Just get a little bit more juice out of that. And May arrives and you're like, okay, we're not doing anything for a little while. So finally there was a chance to slow down and, for me, do the crossword in the newspaper every day. Something like
You're
that.
talking
So,
like an old man. Come
exactly.
on.
It's a preview of retirement and I don't like it.
Alex is 31 going on 75.
Exactly.
He's yeah, right.
Exactly.
Well, I want to go back to the point you made about coming out of this and what that looks like, because I thought that was good. I think it's something that, Carlin, you and I and John, we all talk about off of this, but I don't think we've really ever covered it on the podcast. Alex, what is your perspective of what this does look like when we come out of it, especially for people that may need a job? Is there going to be overlap? Are people going to be hungrier and there might not be as many opportunities because everyone's, fighting for the job? What do you kind of see there?
I think taking a short, medium, and long-term perspective, in the short term, there is going to be leaning out of broadcasting. I think you're already seeing kind of the sketch of how the NHL in particular is going to do their broadcasting for the playoffs, whereby instead of having, I'll give a perfect example. When the Kings were playing Vegas in the first round in 2018, you had more than four concurrent TV broadcasts. I think, yeah, four concurrent TV broadcasts going on at T-Mobile Arena and back at Staples Center. So you had NBC Sports, Hockey Night in Canada, Fox Sports West, and AT&T Sportsnet all going at once, all with their own productions, all with cameras of their own inside the arena. Everybody's on site. You had Westwood One radio there. You had local radio, national radio. So you've got all these concurrent productions going to cover the same exact game. What it looks like will happen for the playoffs is NBC and Hockey Night in Canada will share a world feed, if you will. And maybe there will be a little bit of customization. Maybe there will be one or two extra cameras that they can cut. Or maybe if they're producing it off-site, for instance, NBC in Connecticut, they can cut their own cameras, irrespective of what Hockey Night in Canada is doing, but they're all sharing the same resources. Broadcasters will be off-site, calling them off of a monitor. This is what I do for tennis most of the year anyway. I don't travel to cover the sport. I do it out of Culver City off a gigantic TV. I think that's the short term, and that's going to hurt in the short term because there are a lot of extra utilities who work on those extra broadcasts. You think about if you have four things going at once, well, you need four primary audio engineers. You need, four utilities who are doing some wiring. You need four stage managers, four talent stats. So all these jobs are going to condense down. That said, I don't see that being a long-term thing because networks are too worried about quality that I don't think they would let that happen over the long term. But in the interim, we've already gone in the direction as an industry of trying to streamline. And I could see, let's say, going forward, you have, let's say, next year for the regular season. Myself and Jim, we may not travel with the team. We may just do it off-site on a monitor. There may be a Fox Sports West production done out of LA, and we are calling them off of monitors. We're cutting our own cameras. We're mixing our own audio, et cetera, but we may not travel. And over the long haul, maybe that's what stays, that your producer, your director, your graphics stay back. They don't travel, and the talent might be on site. So that's the way that I see it. It's more of a continuum rather than, everything changes now. It feels like the walls are closing in. It feels like, everything is going to change, and that may be true for the short term, but I'm a firm believer that quality matters. And, sales departments in these regional sports networks want something that is high enough quality that will grab your attention. And, when they're selling a spot, the Arco top tier play, they don't want it to look like crap. So they'll want it to be quality in the end. They'll take this interim piece and be okay with it for the time being.
It's got to also be hard to think about the quality of what you'd be able to get to if you and Jim weren't traveling, because you're in the locker room talking to players, getting stories one-on-one for the broadcast that night. And it's a lot of legwork. Like before the show goes on, all of that legwork leading up to it is what makes that quality so quality. So if that changed, how would you be able to even bring that same level of quality if that access gets kind of shifted?
That's the simple answer. You wouldn't. You would just call the game as is, and there wouldn't be as much context. There wouldn't be as much background. And that's just the sacrifice that, you have to be upfront with people and say, we didn't talk to X person. Whereas in the past, we may have been able to do that. So it's weird because, again, I've seen it from both sides of the coin, right? I've been able to have that access from the NHL on NBC, right? We get time one-on-one with the coach for the team, and whenever we want it, we can request it. Even the most ornery coach in the league, and Randy Carlisle back in the day, we could ask and say, we want a one-on-one with Randy Carlisle, and he couldn't say no.
Oh, wow.
So I've seen that part of it. And then when I go to cover tennis, I have no access. Like we're doing it off of a TV, and we have to rely on press clippings, and we have to rely on just what we see on the monitor in front of us, and go from there. So, it takes a little bit of a different skill set to just to pare back and give kind of the bare minimum. But we may have to do that for a little while, and people may have to be okay with it for a little while. I think you'd see a big pushback in the industry if that were an ask over the long term. And I don't see it happening on the talent side. I could see it, like I said, on the production side. But I think you'd see a big pushback in taking announcers off site for a long period of time.
And I feel like that probably puts more emphasis on you and Jim working together as a team and trying to figure out, like, well, how do we make this a quality broadcast, even though we're not getting the same material? And I was reading a few articles from like The Athletic talking about you speak so highly about Jim, and you've leaned on him for a few seasons now, and he's really taken you under his wing and help make sure that you feel comfortable, respected, and make sure you guys have a quality broadcast. So when you think about moving forward, are you and Jim going to be like really, really trying to lean on each other during this time then?
I'd be curious. So I think it might go in the other direction. Like, I have a little bit more comfort with the technical side of the TV broadcast than he might. So yeah, it might go in the different direction to what's going on if we can't get something, and I might have to take a little bit more of that load. I'd actually be curious. Before restarting in any capacity on our show, I actually want to talk to the guys who were doing NASCAR, because they've done a full production in 3 spots. I don't know if you guys have kind of read up on what they've been doing, but replays and some elements out of Los Angeles,
Oh, wow.
some production out of Charlotte, and then you had the director and a technical director on site at the racetrack. The announcers are in a booth in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're not on site. So, and they're separate from one another. So they're not, as you know, myself and Jim, we talk, kind of either off air, we give,
Like
we
this.
give each other a look, we give hand signals. Exactly. So if you're going to be in a separate space, how do you handle that? And luckily we've had the experience where he's been inside the glass and I've been up in the booth, and we don't have that luxury. But I'd be curious to talk to the guys who were doing the NASCAR production to say, well, how did you handle certain situations with regard to replay or graphics? And I think the answer is just slow down, take a breath. Those NBC shows, you'll notice that when replays come up, I will quickly get out of what I'm saying. And there might be a pause for a moment or two until they cue up the replay, because I don't want to step on whatever Jim or Brian Hayward or whoever's inside the glass. I don't want to step on what they're going to say because I can't see them.
I'm curious, and I was texting with a friend of mine, as we're talking about as these broadcasts start back up, and you kind of hinted at, when do you kind of take the reins of the broadcast? When does Jim kind of take the reins, and how you guys bounce off of each other there? When things do get back, and you do your first broadcast, as the guy who's bringing everyone back in, have you thought about like how you're going to approach that situation? Because I know that's a deep question, but a friend of mine is an aspiring play-by-play broadcaster. And I said, hey, what would you want to ask this guy, with this whole situation going on? And he said, I'd be curious about how he handles his first broadcast, being back. How does he handle the emotions? What words is he going to say? Do you think about that, or you still have to kind of see what else happens in the world? Because at this point, nothing is surprising us. So
a little bit of both, I think. There's you certainly kick around ideas. I love the art form of putting together a good tease. And I enjoy writing out in August or September, early September, a tease that's going to be cut and put on the broadcast for October, right? I want to be able to put that out in advance for whatever we put on the air when we start November, December, whatever the regular season is going to start again for the Kings. But I have thought about that. It depends on how much control you have on the show, right? If I'm working playoffs for NBC, I'm just a bit player. They're going to have an editor. They're going to have their host voice, whatever. They're probably going to have Doc Emmerich voice a piece, and I can only add a little bit to it. So you think about it. The thing that brings me back a little bit is right after the shooting in Las Vegas, I was doing the first Vegas Golden Knights home game, and it was nationally televised. It was their first ever home game, and I was absolutely terrified, because I'm in my first full year of doing network broadcasts. I've only been doing a handful of NHL games, period, to this point, and you're entrusting me to handle this situation. And I can't tell you how many times I wrote and rewrote my copy for when we got the toss from Liam McHugh to try to come on the air. And I've looked back and hindsight's 2020, and the emotions at the time of the situation. Like, I look back and say, you know what? I could have paused a little bit more. I could have had a little bit more inflection. I could have done this, could have done that. But, ultimately, if you're capturing it in a positive way, and that was the feedback that I got, was that, what, you did enough, and you didn't overkill, didn't have any overkill there. So I was proud of that. And I think the same kind of situation is going to happen when we come back for the next regular season. How do you find the right words? And I'll write and rewrite something to bring us on the air, and then after that, let's just play hockey. Like, you don't need to dwell on it too much, but you want to say something at least a little bit pithy, I guess.
Pithy. Always with that was that adjective.
Well, I think I'm using the word right.
I gotta look that one up. I do. On a regular game with a regular tease, what goes into that? And I know you said you maybe start writing in August for something that's in October. Say you don't have that much time. Say you got to change on the fly. I mean, is this something that you put on yourself, or is this something that's expected of all play-by-play broadcasters to kind of learn when they're going through school? Like, hey, you better start writing your teases, or is that just the extra flair that like Alex Faust brings as a special?
I don't know, because it depends on the production. I'd like to think that that's the value add that I bring, that I want to write all of my own material. I don't want to have something fed to me and read it because it's not in my voice. And some broadcasters are okay with it, and it works. But I really take pride in being a competent writer, to be able to put something together on an as-needed basis. When we open our season, how do we want to describe the narrative going into the year? When we have our home opener, I actually, propose the idea, instead of me reading something and trying to sound dramatic, I propose the idea this year of, let's just use fans, and they can describe why they love coming to games. And so I was there with our producer, Steve Dorfman, Hoover,
I was gonna say,
as it were.
Steve.
Yeah, Steven. He told me when I first started, and I entered, make my first introduction. Oh, Steven, nice to meet you. And he's like, only my mother calls me Steven. Don't do that again. But yeah, so I was just standing beside him as he was with a camera person interviewing fans as we were collecting material, and just thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to structure this? How are we going to shape this? So it's almost having the frame of mind of a producer or an editor, and how the end product might look. Because I can write something out, but if they can't cut video to it or they can't put music to it, it's not going to work. So having that perspective, I think, is important.
We're all our own worst critic. We've talked about that a little bit, and just even you bringing up the Vegas Golden Knights game, where I'm sure there's a lot of people that were watching and are like, wow, Alex did an incredible job. I felt the emotion. I felt like I was a part of this, and I wanted to support everybody there. And I know there's been plenty of times in all of our career where we're just like, we talk to our boss, director, producer, whatever, and we're like, oh, so sorry about that. They're like, no, it sounded great. Like, stop beating yourself up. So when you think about the time you've had with the Kings so far, I'm sure you've beaten yourself up a few times over the seasons. What are you really trying to work on to prepare yourself for next season that you really want to be good at?
I think you hit it spot on. It's especially if you really take a lot of pride in your work, you're going to kill yourself when things don't go well. And I'm guilty of that. And I know I have to be better in that way of just letting stuff go. But I'm also a perfectionist, and I want to do the best possible job. I think going into the season, one thing I actually worked on a lot going towards the end of the year was just pausing more in certain situations. Just give it a beat. You don't have to be right on it and try to be correct 100% of the time, because sometimes you do mess up if you're trying to be that close. Let's say in player identification or determining whether the puck is in the net or not. If you pause a half second, nobody's going to care. So if you give yourself a little bit more breathing room, you're going to be right 100% of the time, even if you're not on it at the exact moment. Television and radio are a little bit different in that in radio you have a bit more of a luxury. The pictures don't match your words, so you can give it a beat a little bit more in radio. And in TV, I always felt more pressured. I have to be on it right at this moment. But I think I realized watching watching not only my work from, previous years where I did it unconsciously, but also watching how other guys handle certain situations that are difficult. You lose sight of a puck, or you can't quite tell which player that is. Just go with it, and don't try to overcompensate. Don't guess. Just be correct rather than being fast in trying to blurt out whatever you've got.
And who does a good job, do you think, whatever sport it may be, just kind of letting the action speak for itself? Because I know I've do some work for the Santa Cruz Warriors, the Golden State Warriors G League team. I was talking to our play-by-play broadcaster, and he's like, a lot of what I've learned is let the game speak for itself. Those pauses are huge. I know I heard Joe Buck speak on this a few different times where, especially in baseball in the playoffs, someone hits a walk-off and it's just, I'm silent. I'm going to let the guy run around the bases. I'm going to let for the action speak for itself. So is there a broadcaster you look towards or a mentor that you talk to about getting better at that?
Well, Abby knows this, how talented John Forsland is. I think he's the preeminent voice.
My heart.
I think he's the preeminent play-by-play guy in hockey in the States right now. And I try to learn a lot from him of how he handles certain situations, and the descriptors that he uses, and he has a very different style when he's doing a local game versus a national game. So it's picking up on certain cues like that. I think in many ways, when you're in an environment like this, where you're at the pinnacle, right? You're at the highest level of hockey in the States. You're looking to peers to say, okay, what can I borrow? What can I learn from how this guy is doing well? And maybe there's somebody who looks at something that I do and says, oh, he does that well. But I think we're all just in the mode of sharing ideas and trying to get better. And it's a constant pursuit of improvement, because if you're not looking to improve, even if you've done this for 20 years, and I go back, even with Johnny, I look back at some of the work he did 15 years ago, and it's very different than some of the work he does today, because he's trying to improve and get better and tweak what he's doing even now. So I think you can take inspiration from even folks at the top of their field who are in constant pursuit of improvement.
And he tells me that all the time too. Just
Mhm.
like, I'm still trying to get better, and I'm like, you're John Forsland, like you don't have to get
Yeah, exactly.
but it's so true. So Carlin, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, on top of kind of fine tuning these different aspects of your job and always continuing to improve, how do you kind of restructure your career as well, and your career goals as you go through this? And let me preface that a little bit more. You landed this job that has so much longevity that or do you just kind of stop with all of your other goals? Do you go, I got this job, 28 years old, this can last me for 40 years. Bob Miller had it for, 44 years. I'm done. Or do you constantly evolve your goals as well, just like you do kind of your work and how good you are while you're doing it?
I think you could coast. You could walk into the job and say, okay, I've made it. This is where I wanted to be, and we're done. But I think what history proves is that if you're not doing a good job on a regular basis, if you're not improving, then people pick up on it. It may take a little while to get there, but if you're not constantly striving to be better, even in the job that you're currently at, even if you didn't have aspirations to do other things, then people pick up on that. I think from my perspective, I never want to stop growing as a broadcaster. And that means both in terms of my skill set and my ability to handle the position, but also, I want to continue to, expand my skill set in terms of the events that I cover. The level of event that you cover in the playoffs for a network is different than, regular season game for your team. Even though, I've made it to the league, and I'm secure in my own being for how I made it to the NHL, right? That's the dream for anybody in this position. But I say, well, you know what? Why can't I work a playoff series for the network? Why can't I work a second round series for the network? Like that's my next goal. I last year I did a playoff series for NBCSN. Well, what's to say I can't look and try to carve out a little bit of the second round instead of just the first round? And some might say that, well, why can't you just appreciate where you're at? And, why can't you be happy with what you've got? And I look at it like, if I'm not striving for what's next, even within, let's say, the structure of the team job, I'm not just the play-by-play announcer. I want to, prove my chops at emceeing events, right? Because, Nick Nixon, he's in the Hall of Fame. He's not going to be with the team forever. I have to prove to the organization that I can handle those situations.
Yeah.
I have to prove to the organization that I can handle talking with sponsors or with, longtime season ticket holders, or somebody else that, they're looking to develop a relationship with. Maybe it's talking with an executive from another team at some luncheon, different situations that I feel constantly like I need to prove myself and I need to improve. I know even doing these Zoom calls, I did a couple of them for not only season ticket members, but for sponsors.
Yeah.
And the first one was like, that didn't really work out so well. So then instead of trying to wing it with just a couple bullet points, I actually wrote out things word for word that I wanted to say. Which it's contrary to what I've told you in the past, Carl, like writing things out. But like I realized, you know what, I didn't really know what I wanted to say. So this time I'm gonna do it, and then maybe next time I could wing it and be a little bit more comfortable in my own shoes. So it's a constant improvement that I'm striving for in every aspect.
So there's one thing from an improvement and growing standpoint that I'm curious, what your take is on, and this kind of goes along with representing the organization and, having those other roles and proving yourself to the organization, and coming from, working with John and Tripp. They have been with the Hurricanes forever, and so one of the things that they bring value to as far as the broadcast goes is the stories that they're able to tell. And for you being 31 years old, you haven't lived through all of that yet with the Kings. So do you kind of live on Jim first? That's not really a skill set that you can teach yourself. It just kind of comes with time. How do you handle those situations?
Yeah, for sure. I for sure I lean on him to do that because it would be disingenuous if I tried. And I think that can be frustrating for our fans sometimes, that I'm deferential and I'm not trying to connect those dots as much, but I'm also trying not to lie, right? I'm not trying to fake it. I have to be myself. And if I'm not comfortable giving that, then I'm not going to force it. At the same time, I have to be ready with either context or knowledge of what he's talking about. So each time that we're bringing up some guy from the past, maybe I'll go back the next day and say, you know what, do I have even a file, just a written file on, what are some key moments from, I don't know, the 1990 LA Kings team that beat Calgary in the playoffs. Okay, well, you know what? Before working for the team, I didn't know about that. So can I go back and cull a little bit more about that team or about a particular player? I mean, now I can give Tiger Williams stories, even though he played before I was born, because Jimmy's told me a little bit about what Tiger did when he was here, and Bob's told me a few stories about it, and heard from Pete Demers. So you can fake it a little bit, but I try not to.
So I was going to say, part of you being young and not knowing or having to rely on Jim for that kind of makes you more relatable too for the younger fans that you're bringing along with you. So have you noticed there's like just kind of a different dynamic between yourself and maybe teenagers that are watching the Kings, or people in their 20s? Are there people that are, kind of aligning with you and like, hey, I didn't know that Tiger Williams story either? And what's been the response like in kind of that department?
Well, yes and no, because there's that aspect of it that I'm relatively new, but I don't want to necessarily give that away on a regular basis, because then I'm just making excuses for myself. And there's also the aspect of it that I'm, as much as I'm the youngest guy in the league, I have an old soul. I don't play video games.
Puzzles.
I'm not all that hip. And I'm not afraid to admit I'm not all that hip. So there's only so far that exactly. There's only so far that the age being a number can go for me.
Crossword puzzles are cool.
They are.
They're cool.
It's read a book, do a crossword puzzle.
I'm not wise enough for crossword puzzles, I'll be honest.
on the plane when like everyone in front of me is doing crossword puzzles, and meanwhile I'm just sitting there like, am I wrong for watching Netflix right now? Like, you're reading the newspaper, Daryl's got his crossword, Jim's doing whatever,
Yeah.
Hoover's got his crossword. I'm just like, am I? This is
It was actually funny the first time kind of seeing all that, because it's a throwback in many ways. And even the players, you know what, they're doing the crosswords, and they're probably more in many respects, the players are more well-read than we are, because they have a lot more downtime to kill. So, you know, Dustin Brown is a voracious reader. Alec Martinez, the same.
Alec, yeah.
And you know, they could rattle off, I don't know how many books that they've read, and I'm like, I only read like 3 books a year, if that. So I think everything being equal, you know, it's a bit of a throwback being on these planes and being in these situations. That pro athletes are not as, you know, they're not just jocks, right? In many respects, some are, and you know who they are, but not as many as you might think.
John, you
got anything else before we get into a game? John has something.
John had a thing.
Yeah, I did have a thing. But you know, it doesn't go off of having fun with crossword puzzles at all. But I know a lot of this podcast is about advice for aspiring broadcasters and everything. And you obviously have an incredible voice and tone, not only on this Zoom call, but in a broadcast. And that's what a lot of us are like trying to figure out. Like, I know a lot of people are probably like, oh, you look back on your childhood videos and you're probably like, you enjoy your voice. I'm like, no, I hated my voice. Everybody hated their voice. So a lot of people always are wondering, like, how do you work on that tone? How do you work on making sure that like you sound that specific way and also sound genuine, not like you have some big old radio voice like, thanks for joining us, Alex.
Right.
But like, how'd you work on that and really find that tone?
I think you'll find the most successful broadcasters in the industry have found a way to make that balance, because much like a theater performer, you have to project when you're on TV. You can't sit back and be tentative, because you don't grab somebody's attention. You don't cut through, as it were. So in the play-by-play world, you know, you're calling a high energy sport to begin with, so you have to be on it. And you know, a guy on the ice, when we mic up players, it's a very different voice that they're speaking in on the ice than even when we're having a conversation off the ice. Like, they turn it on for the game, and we're the same way. I think you'll run into a couple of announcers who just that's their voice. That's just how they sound. And I know I sound different when I'm calling the game versus when I'm having a conversation, but I try consciously not to be too different. And I think, you know, now having 3 years under my belt in the NHL, I'm far more comfortable relaxing a bit. And it's a lesson that I think every young broadcaster has to learn. I get emails from college kids, and they send their demos, and, hey, you know, I would love advice. And they're trying so hard. They're trying so hard to be that announcer voice. And you have to tell them, just, you know, relax, and you'll get there. And it's a process that I went through. It took years. I still feel like in certain situations I'll walk in, you know, especially with a sport, let's say with football. And I went back and watched the game that I did for Fox back in the fall. And I realized for portions of the game, I was tight because I hadn't done a football game in a little while. So I had to sound like I knew what I was doing, even though I was kind of fumbling around in the dark a little bit. So it's
Great
a process.
Use of fumble there.
Yeah,
no pun.
exactly. Pun intended. That's the other thing I need to work on is recognizing Jim's puns, because they sometimes just, but I think it's more reps, right? The more and more reps you get in this, the more comfortable you are being on camera, being in situations where you're talking to people who you know are watching, but you can't see them. And I always view even doing a game as I'm doing a game for an audience of maybe 2 people, the producer and the executive producer at the network. Like, so I'm trying to do stuff for them, not being cognizant of the, you know, for last year, again, going back to the network stuff, and again, I'm shitting my pants. You can bleep that out if you want. But I'm shitting my pants in the series last year that I'm doing for NBC, because I looked at the viewership numbers, and I'm glad I didn't until the very end of the series, and when it was over and done with, because Game 6 last year, I think, had 1.7 million for the Vegas San Jose Game 6, the most watched Game 6 on record in the opening round for NBCSN. And I'm so glad I didn't know that going into the game.
Oh my God.
Because you don't think about it, right? You're looking at what's in front of you, and you're thinking about who's in your ear, the producer back in the truck, and you don't really take stock of it. And I'm sure you'd get a similar answer from a Joe Buck or a Jim Nance, that even when they're working the Super Bowl, you're cognizant of it being the Super Bowl because you have all these extra resources on your production. The rhythm of the broadcast is a little bit different. You have all these elements that you have to incorporate in. And yes, you're saying in and out of commercial breaks or whatever. It's the Super Bowl, right? But you're not thinking of the fact that 100 million people are watching. You're just doing the show. So the lesson for broadcasters of any level would be, maybe you're doing a web stream for a Division III college that might have 100 people watching. And then you graduate to something else and you're doing, let's say, college basketball on ESPNU, and there's a viewership of 10,000, let's say. Well, you're treating the broadcast with the same amount of care. It doesn't matter how many people are watching. It really doesn't. And for our local shows, I mean, in LA, I'll be perfectly honest, we are the 7th most popular team in a city that, for most of its teams to begin with, the ratings and viewership figures aren't all that high. So I'm taking that to mean that, okay, well, when I'm doing our shows, I'm not just slacking off because there might be fewer people watching because we're not as good right now, and we're in a market that doesn't have a large share of the population watching hockey. It doesn't matter to me. I still want to do a quality broadcast. I still want this to be of the utmost quality that you get in a traditional hockey market in Boston or New York. What difference does it make that we're in LA? So that's the way that I take each broadcast. Is I want it to be quality no matter where I'm doing it or what I'm doing.
This industry is so mental. Like, I don't think people understand the mental exhaustion like we and not saying that's a negative thing, like goes back to like we know what we're getting into, like but we are so hard on ourselves and we think so hard about those things. Like, it's almost back to your point about the, I'm glad I didn't know those numbers. Like, it's like live versus recording too. Like, it's almost harder to record something versus just doing it live and not thinking about it. Like, how many times do we record our podcast intros? But then we don't we're like, oh, we need to redo that. We didn't do it well.
We've had some rough ones. That's for sure.
It's weird. I'm with you 100%. I would much rather do our opens live than tape them and try to have them be perfect. Because in your head, you're like, oh, it's taped. So if we mess up, let's just do it again.
Yep.
I'd much rather do it live and breeze through it than try to be perfect. Even though, I'm a perfectionist and I would like to have it be as, the best it can possibly be. And that goes back to, Carlin, what we've talked about it, and one of the things that I struggled with early in my career was I wanted to have the right way of saying things in our opens and on camera, and I would write it out word for word, and I would oftentimes be like, that didn't come out right, or I didn't say the right word.
Cripple yourself before
you're right.
you even cripple yourself.
Totally. And you're, so and it took me a long time. It took me, 4 or 5 years of working in television to understand that if you know the material, you don't need to write out the words because you can just walk up and start talking about it. If you wanted to start talking about Kings hockey right now, I'd be able to rattle off 20 things to say, and I'd be articulate because I know the material. Yeah. If you wanted me to do something about, Baylor football, forget it. But, okay, maybe I'd have to write it out then. But I would, before going into a broadcast, I would want to know the material. That I think is the biggest for any young broadcaster is, yes, there's the preparation side of it, but it's also internalizing that prep. It's not just having the notes in front of you and they, mine may look nice and fancy, but it's not that I have that in front of me. It's you got to know it going in. It's an open book test in many ways, but you still have to study for it.
That was one of the biggest things that I think you taught me, because I would write down my hits before puck drop, and you would just be like, relax. Do you know what you're going to talk about? I'm like, yeah. And you're like, then don't look at the notes. I'm like,
Exactly.
right. You're right. Oh my gosh.
Well, but I mean, you still need them in some ways, right? Because, and I struggle with this.
Remember what I'm going to talk about.
Right. Well, yeah. And like, I'll give you a perfect example. You want to talk about deer in headlights. The worst experience for me is doing a studio show. Because you're on camera for an extended period of time, you don't have the luxury like I do in my job of I'm off camera. I can glance down and look at where we're going. If I'm doing a studio show, and I've done these for Tennis Channel where, I'm filling in and I'm not used to the format. I'm not used to where we're at and where we're going. What do we do next? And you're on camera and you're like, where do I go? What do I do? And you can't buzz down to the producer and say what's coming up next.
It's all on you.
You have to exactly. It's all on you. So that's why I don't envy, when you're in a position where you have to be on camera a little bit more, because you not only do you have to know the material, but you have to know where we're directing traffic to, how we're getting from point A to point B, and in many ways it's more difficult. It may not be on for as extended a period of time as you are in play-by-play, but when you have to be clean, right?
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more pressure in some ways.
Biggest saving grace is when Hoover goes off camera, and I'm like,
exactly.
Yeah, for you
exactly.
him as well, and I can still see the live feed. So I love that. My favorite part is when you guys know you're off camera, and then you spin around and go and turn and look at the
exactly.
ice, still talking. It's like my favorite thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, for people listening that aren't broadcasters and are listening just for fun, that's a thing. People always ask me, like, how do you remember, like, for football? So when I do Sidelined for football, like, I'll do my opening hit, and the first, like, 20-30 seconds are like on camera, and then it's like off camera. The producer's in your ear telling you you're off camera. So as soon as that pans to something else, show business, baby. You can just look at what's going on in the field, check out your notes. It's funny, the things that people ask me, they're like, wow, you memorized that whole thing? I'm like, funny you say that.
Yeah, not really. Not really. Abby, I will say too, that's one thing that, you have to get used to, and you have to be able to do in this business, is talk while somebody is talking in your ear.
Oh, it's so much harder than you would think it would be.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially when you're trying to hold a show, and that's probably what, when you're doing studio, because it's like, look at the camera, look at your notes, but not look at your notes, like be on camera. And like, yes, they're like kind of leading you how to go, but you're also trying to think about, what you're going to say. And, John, you guys know this too, like in-game hosting is that's a great, starting point for that. Like, look, having to act and ad-lib and do your thing while a producer's in your ear, in-game hosting is like exactly how a broadcast is in that realm. So that's a big learning process when, people getting into this industry. That's in-game hosting brings some value in that aspect of it.
Alex, I feel like you've done everything under the sun except in arena hosting.
You know what? That's the one thing I haven't done. I once or twice. Exactly. Once or twice in the AHL, I did a live post-game auction that we had on the ice for the jerseys, kind of like a jersey off the back type thing.
Okay.
And that's probably the closest I've come in that sense. So
how'd you feel? How'd you do?
Probably in hindsight, it was probably okay. But in the moment, you're just like, am I doing the right thing? Am I keeping the energy up? Like you do have to be cognizant with in-arena hosting of so many more things, because your job is not to entertain the people on TV. You have to pump up people in the arena and keep up the energy. And that's a different kind of energy that you need. When I'm doing a game, I don't have to be all hype, right? I can kind of be level. But your job in the arena is to provide atmosphere, especially if it wasn't there before they came to you in that game of, all right, guys, we got to pump. It's a totally different skill set. It really is. And I'm sure, John, you run into this all the time of like and you're not interacting with other people on a broadcast. You are responsible for bringing us back in and then getting us back to the game action. And it's not as simple as people make it out to be.
And there's an optimism and energy that you need to try to put together, especially like this last season with the Sharks. Like, it was weird. Like the first season, they were weren't good since I got the job. And it was
Mhm.
weird because like the in-arena host role, not only you have people in your ear and you got to pay attention to that, you got to have a good presence, and then you got to have an optimism in your voice and this energy when people are just like, this sucks. Like, I
Mhm.
don't
That's
like
the
what the
hardest
score
part
is.
about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
the hardest part.
it's
I
tough.
always tell people that trying to keep people hype when we just got scored on. It's like 5-0, you know?
But I think that's where I think in arena hosting for me, I'm like, my job's not dependent on what the record is, what the score is, how many
Mhm.
people are in the building, or if it's a specialty night or whatever. Like, I'm there to entertain people. There might be somebody that comes to the game and might be their first hockey game,
Sure.
first Sharks game, whatever it may be. And I want them to leave and feel like they had a great experience, no matter what the score was or no matter what happened.
And you have to
That's what it's
deliver a
about.
consistent product too, that it can't be different from game to game based on where you are in the standings or based on, in some respects, the score of the game. It has to be a consistent product as well.
Mhm.
We had the luxury in TV many times of if it's a 7-1 route, we can let loose a little bit and you can kind of go off script. And you really don't have that luxury as much in game.
There's still promotions that are planned even if
Yeah.
you're down.
You still got to
7-1.
execute sales elements.
Still have
That's
to
the
do
bottom line.
the dance cam.
Yeah.
Ugh.
Boy,
Which is
it hard.
sponsored by,
Mercury Insurance.
exactly. So you still got to execute sales elements.
Yep.
I'll do t-shirt toss over dance cam when the team's getting smoked every time.
Oh,
Dance
yeah.
cam, everybody's just like, I don't want to dance. This is the worst.
Right,
But
exactly.
t-shirts, you could be down by 100 and people are just like, something free? A t-shirt?
Right.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
so down for this. Like, I don't care what the score is.
Mhm.
Oh man.
So
Abby, for our game, we should have had him do some
Speaking of game,
calls.
that
but Abby,
would be good. That
a
would have
fun
been
game
good.
for you to end on, Alex. That I think you'll think is fun. I hope you think it's fun.
Speaking of games, actually, Carlin came up with this. I think I gotta give her the credit. This is fun. But I'll go ahead and start, and then we can go around and do it. It's would you rather, but like broadcast style. Okay.
All right.
And so, so the first one is: would you rather hiccup during a player's first NHL goal or burp as you're going into commercial?
I've actually burped on air before, so I can say
Yes, I was hoping we
I've
would
ticked
get
that
that.
box.
yes.
What show is that?
Oh, this was back in college. My
Oh,
buddies
man.
did not let me live that down ever.
Oh no!
It's happened.
How'd you handle that situation?
I just didn't. I just kept going. Didn't acknowledge it. Just kept going. And they were like, "How did you keep going?" And I was like, "I didn't want to draw attention to it. Would you?"
Oh my gosh. This
Yeah,
next
just
one,
keep going.
this next one, you
Oh,
kind of
God.
touched on it a little bit. And I feel like you may have had some trouble with this if you were around during that 70s line, but
Mhm.
mispronounce a player's name or call a player by another player's name.
Done both.
Oh.
And it actually, I'd much rather call the wrong name than mispronounce a name, because you can't really recover from mispronouncing. You could say, oh well, I saw a 7 and I didn't see the other number or whatever.
Right.
But mispronouncing a name just shows lack of preparation. And I've done that. I've done that in certain circumstances where I used, as much as the NHL does a lot of things right, their pronunciation guide is wrong a good chunk of the time. And Nikita Zadorov from the Colorado Avalanche, my first year, I don't even know what I called him, but it wasn't that. And and I didn't realize till after. And this is where, again, I blame myself for not being prepared, but I think in certain circumstances, that's where you'd like to have a little bit of help, to have somebody, with more experience to say, hey, this is not how you say the name. I think he was a relatively new player at the time, so we didn't know. But at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, I was kind of hung out to dry, and but at the end of the day, my lack of preparation is what did that.
It's also a good
was
reminder to triple, double check your sources too, because we
Yep.
think we have something right, or we wrote down a stat, or someone gave us some information. You don't realize sometimes how there's misinformation going around.
I'm guilty of that.
Yeah, and not by anyone's fault. Like someone literally thinks that they're correct when they're trying to help you. So it's like, oh shoot.
Yeah.
Double, triple checking.
Mhm.
There's two challenges with that. What you said, the pronunciation guide, it's even like if it lays it out for you, it's still, there's always still sometimes a slightly different like
Right.
pronunciation that you can't get from the guide. And then the other one that I've dealt with before is the names that you think are the easiest, especially in hockey, they're sneaky. So like
Mhm.
Roy, like ROY.
Yes.
I was like, Roy, easy. Like, no, it's Wah, not Roy. And you know,
Yeah.
those are
Mhm.
some of those. So
Mhm.
you really have to check every single one. It doesn't matter what that last name looks like.
Yep. Exactly.
So,
I think there's sometimes players that actually like they're in the league for a couple years and then that's when they actually tell us like it's like this, because I'm pretty sure that was everybody said Pedersen, but
Yeah.
he ended up saying in an interview it's Peterson.
Well,
And
and that's one that we run into as well with a player who came up in a certain way, and let's say you know, especially from Sweden, right? And he came up in World Juniors, and the pronunciation from Sweden, because it was intended for a Swedish audience on Swedish television, was
Mhm.
Pedersen, right? That's
Mhm.
how you would say it in Sweden. But for a North American audience, he wanted it to be he wanted it to be Peterson,
Mm-hmm.
and I always struggle with like I can understand a player wanting to do that, and I don't want to tell them how to pronounce their own name. But I think we all want it to be authentic in a way, and
Yeah.
and saying Peterson to us, I still whatever Hockey Night in Canada does, we think is appropriate. So if they continue to say Pedersen, that's what we'll go with.
Yeah.
I think the ones that frustrate me are like Marchand versus Marchand, or you know, Tavares versus Tavares, and
yeah.
you know, where things get changed around. Like, just pick one and stick with it. That'd be my choice.
all right, next question. Would you rather sneeze when your analyst is talking or sneeze during the live show open?
Oh gosh, you know what? I actually find it really hard to sneeze while I'm talking. Like, I've never sneezed while talking. I've always just sneezed kind of. I'm just standing there and just sneeze. I don't, for whatever reason, I don't sneeze while talking. And the great thing for us that sideline reporters and hosts don't have is that cough button. We have the cough button,
No, that's
and
our
I can
next
just
one.
Wait,
yeah,
right.
do that.
That's our next one. I know. I was waiting for you to bring that up. I thought you were going to bring
Mhm.
it up on the first one.
Nope.
Wait, but so okay, but sneeze, not you sneezing while you're talking, but when somebody else, if like Jim's
Oh.
talking, or during an open.
Oof.
Okay, you said the show open was recorded. So has the well, I guess they might mute your mic.
Yeah,
But has the
we do it
open been
live
going
usually.
and you
We
sneeze?
usually do our open live. So we're if
Oh, I
I
thought you said it
did
was
sneeze,
recorded.
The tease is
that's
the
not
tease
happening. You
is
just
recorded.
jinxed it, but it
The
hasn't happened
tease.
yet.
Oh,
You're
Oh, the
right.
tease?
Yeah, tease is separate. Yeah.
We almost always tape the tease.
Yeah.
Occasionally, we'll do it live if it's short, but yeah, usually we tape that.
Then the last.
That saves me in that regard.
Abby, do you want to hit him with the last?
I
one?
actually
Sure.
here's one. I did call a game in December with a nosebleed, so that was fun.
I remember.
Ooh.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And like, I didn't want anybody to care about it. And Jim just starts all of a sudden talking, well, my partner over here is struggling a little bit. I'm like, Jim, like, I'll just, I'm a hockey player. You play through it, right? Like, so I had the worst cold I've ever had. And It was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I could not stop blowing my nose at every stoppage. And then all of a sudden, boom. Yeah, and I've got a nosebleed while I'm trying to call the game. So literally at every stoppage, I'm going like this and just pulling my nose back and trying to end it.
Oh, man.
And I called a goal, and then I immediately turned away and just started trying to do that again because I knew it was going to be a problem. So that was a first.
Oh,
That's
the blessings,
wild.
though, of like not being on camera while that happens.
Mhm.
You are so lucky.
I requested
my God.
specifically, can we not go on camera to start the third period, please? And they were
I'm having
happy
some
to
issues.
accommodate that request. Although our director, Mike Hassan, was like, no, I think you should go on camera because he's being a little shit, you know. Love him.
Oh, Hassan.
Okay,
Oh,
so
God.
speaking of the cough button,
Mhm.
all right, would you rather forget to press the cough button or forget that you are live?
Oh gosh, I think it's forget that you're live because if you're live, you're kind of in the mode of you're not going to say anything stupid, or at least you shouldn't try to. And I've been in modes where I've probably pushed the envelope on the talkback button with the truck, and been in a situation where if the talkback button wasn't working, it wouldn't reflect well.
Wouldn't want that going out.
No. But yeah, I wouldn't want to be in a situation where, because there's so much that goes on in commercial breaks, and even, you know, when you're preparing for a show, that you don't want that going out to other people. You know, you might make fun of somebody, you might, and things just get completely taken out of context. That would be my one thing. And I think there have been instances, you know, back in the 90s when satellite technology was used to carry clean feeds of shows, where, you know, it'd be in commercial break, and people who used to have the, you know, the and still do, I guess, some of these what is it, like a C-band antenna or something, that you could pick up like the raw satellite feed from something.
God.
And there are recordings of like, oh, you know, there's this baseball broadcast and some guy cursing in the commercial breaks. I'm like, you know, what are we trying to accomplish by doing that? So when we're in a mode where, you know, you have a microphone in front of you, always assume it's on, and try to behave in the way that you would if you had a live mic at all times.
That's great advice.
I love
Absolutely great advice. Like, that's like, double down on that for everyone listening. If there is a microphone near you, pretend that it is on and you are live. Because
I think we've talked about this before, haven't we? On a recent episode. Yeah.
If there's a microphone in front of Patrick or I and it's just sitting on the table, it's on, and like the truck can choose whether or not they want to turn it up and listen to what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I mean, that it's not going out to TV, but no one's hearing it. Like, people are listening. So even if you're in arena hosting, they just choose when they broadcast you.
Exactly.
Still live the whole time. So be nice to your coworkers. Say all the things that you would say if you were live, and just remember, treat that like it's hot and it's on all the freaking time. That is so important.
It's just like a sense of professionalism. Like, if you want to just, you know, talk with the boys, like, do it over beers after the game. Like, some of those things, you don't have to have some of those conversations. And I know it was tough for me at times, because my old game presentation director, like, he would say some off the cuff stuff, and like the way my wheels are turning, it's like, oh, I'd have a great comeback for that. But it's like, who knows what happens with the mic?
Exactly.
Like,
you never know.
Game. Yeah.
You never know. Alex, we can't thank you enough for spending some time and chatting with us and giving all of this amazing advice for up and coming play-by-play broadcasters, really anyone that's looking to break into our industry. Just hearing your side of things, you know, from the challenges to the successes, it's been wonderful hearing your take on all of them. So thank you so much for joining Sidelined.
I appreciate it. Thanks for the invitation, and stay safe. We'll find a way through this. We'll get back to sports soon.
Well said, Alex. We can't wait. Oh my God.
Thanks a lot, Alex.
Guys, I loved that conversation. I mean, the perspective that he had was so valuable, you know, not just for aspiring play-by-play broadcasters, but, you know, for us as well. It's tough. It's really cool that he's only 31 years old and he's in the chair that he's in. So it was really cool to hear his advice, you know, the things to do. And it's so valuable to the broadcast. Obviously, I mentioned this at the beginning. It's a valuable position, but it's such a tough position as well. And I could totally relate. You know, we talked about having a full-time job on top of that. It's very common in the industry. So it was great to hear that from him. And that was a big part of his journey and a big part of allowing him to succeed. We know this industry is a grind, and there's a lot of things that a lot of us do outside of what people see, you know, on social media that we're doing just with sports and in the teams that we're currently with. So it was really great to have that conversation with him.
It was nice to hear the things that he thinks about that maybe the people at home aren't thinking about. So he's, you know, his own harshest critic, but comes up with things like, oh, I could have just taken a bigger breath during this time. And then, you know, learning about, does he use his broadcast voice all the time? And then, no, actually, I try to sound like myself, and then throw a little bit of that in there. Like, it was kind of cool to hear and see his perspective on his own position and bring some insight to people like us and to listeners at home as well.
And you could tell his preparation is just fantastic. Like, Carlin, you've worked with him, and you know how prepared and organized he always is.
It's unbelievable.
And that's what you can even see with when we were talking to him before, like, hey, do you want us to give you all the questions, like tell you a little bit, give you some bullet points? Like, no, let's go. Like, I'm prepared for this. And it was just like, it's a total testament to who he is when you see him on a broadcast and when he's on a Zoom call like this. And then a lot of people really want to know about the ins and outs of these jobs. Like there's so much that goes into being a play-by-play broadcaster. It's not like I show up to the game, I sit in the chair, I have a good tone of voice, and I tell people what's going on. There's so much that leads up to that, and they lean on ringside reporters like you, Carlin, and the staff that they have around them. And he just explained it all, and it was fantastic. And what I'm going to explain right now is how you can follow us on social media and make sure that this podcast continues to blow up. So you can follow us at Sideline Pod on Twitter and Instagram. We got some amazing episodes coming out, so make sure that you subscribe so you don't have to just follow the links that we give you. It's already going to be uploaded on your favorite podcast app. And then make sure that you like, comment, do all that good stuff. And please, please, please tell us how beautiful we are in the comments. Come on. We need that.
Always. John's hair is really. How cool
Stop
is his
it.
hair? How cool is it?
Rate it again.
Rate
Continue to rate John's hair.
That's what helps me fall asleep at night. You guys telling me how good my hair looks. Thanks again so much for listening. We'll see you guys next time.